Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started now. I want to thank everybody for coming. My name is Monique Boulay. I am the CEO of the Acadiana Planning Commission. And just to kind of give you a brief background of why we're here, how we got here, I think most of you know, but it's been a couple of years. I guess the ABC board, made up of the parish presidents, of Dr. Savoy and of One Acadiana, we've been having this conversation for quite some time about the importance of broadband infrastructure in our communities. About 2.5 years ago, I guess, we started applying for a grant with USDA, and we were funded, and then set out on a really in-depth process of understanding broadband in Acadiana, really doing a situational assessment, and then identifying, what those next steps might be. And out of that work, out of a lot of work, it was a lot of work, came the report that we're here to talk about today. And I think Stephen and Gary have their copies. If you would hold it up, thanks.
And there's QR codes.
Yes, we do have it on our website, and you have a little QR code if you want to link to it and look at it. In it really does a download on the technology as well as an assessment of each of our parishes, but then also a historical view of broadband, how we got to where we are, and how we move forward. And so it's been a really good experience. Today we have a panel here to talk about that work. But to just touch base on the board initiative, right? We have a lot of conversations about what are our common problems and how do we solve them together. And this one really surfaced to the front. And it was a comment that came out of Evangeline Parish from Donald Bourgeois. He stopped me one day, and it was in a meeting, and he said, if there is one thing you can do for us, one single thing, it is broadband. And it really struck me because that parish really struggles with a lot of issues, job growth or lack of jobs, right? Poverty, high poverty levels, lots of issues. And so we really did set out to look at it and to see how we move forward. In the meantime, COVID came along, which is a bad thing, but out of COVID is going to come a great deal of funding for broadband. So when we started, I remember saying, I don't know how we're going to do this, but we're going to figure it out. And then broadband was like COVID was like the fairy funding godmother, I guess, in how we can actually do this. And so with that, I'm going to introduce the panel. Well, actually, let me stop and just thank. We have Vineeth Iyengar here today, who's the state director, and Vineeth is going to talk to you, and I'm going to introduce him formally after the panel. But I really want to thank you for being here, and I really want to thank you for your support throughout this process. Vineeth has taken on a huge job. To do this across the state is complex, and it brings a lot of challenges that we have a lot of respect for, because every region is different. The capacities are different, the understandings are different, and so he's really got to put together something that is applicable across a lot of different landscapes. And so thank you very much, and thank you for supporting our landscape and our efforts. And so today, our panel here, thank you. I'm going to start with Stephen Barnes. Dr. Barnes is the director of the Kathleen Blanco Public Policy Center at the University of Louisiana and an associate professor of economics in the B.I. Moody III College of Business. Dr. Barnes also serves as an independent economist on the Louisiana Revenue Estimating Conference, a forecasting panel that sets income projections used to create the state budget. He has collaborated with federal and state agencies, industry partners, and advocacy groups, as well as scholars in more than a dozen disciplines on research addressing many aspects of the economy and population of Louisiana. Dr. Barnes holds a PhD in economics from the University of Texas at Austin. And I want to say a special thank you to Stephen. Well, first, let me just say it's kind of ironic. I guess I spend a lot of my own efforts trying to create my own footing in my career. I live in my mother's space, but today I'm introducing the Kathleen Babineau Blanco Policy Center in the Kathleen Babineau Blanco Auditorium. So I might think I am in my own space, but I think I live in her space. But her space is tremendous, and I really want to thank Stephen, because the work they do is powerful, and it's data-driven research that changes communities and increases our quality of life in ways that are tremendous. So this is one piece of what he does, and thank you for partnering with us, and thank you for being on the panel. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Gary Wagner. Gary currently holds the Acadiana Business Economist Endowed Chair at the University of Louisiana. In this role, he monitors the region's economic environment, conducts research and analysis, and engages with external stakeholders on behalf of the Moody College of Business and the university. Dr. Wagner holds a PhD in economics from West Virginia University. His professional research has appeared in many leading economic journals, including the Journal of Law and Economics, Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization, National Tax Journal, Economics and Politics, Regional Science and Urban Economics, Papers in Regional Science, and Public Choice. Prior to joining the University of Louisiana, he was Vice President and Senior Regional Officer for the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. Thank you, Gary, and thank you for your work. I'm going to let you speak. Gary has been a tremendous asset in this. There we go. Next, Rachel Godo. Rachel is the APC Director for Community and Economic Development for the Acadiana Planning Commission. Rachel leads the APC teams for several of our key initiatives, including broadband, watershed, community planning, and revitalization projects. Rachel received her master's in public administration from the E.J. Orso College of Business at LSU with a concentration in public policy. Prior to the Planning Commission, Ms. Godo managed a community-wide substance use prevention program for Lafayette Consolidated Government. She possesses 10 years of experience in project management, coalition building, public administration, and grants program management. Rachel is known for her ability to step into complex issues and really draw people together to be effective, to have real results. And then we have Chad Lacone. Chad has worked for the Lafayette Metropolitan Planning Organization and then the Acadiana Planning Commission since 2011 as a planner and economic development specialist, respectively. He obtained his Juris Doctorate from Southern University Law School, and in the spring of 18, he was responsible for preparing a nomination for the Acadiana Region's Opportunity Zone Regional Strategy to the governor's office, which was awarded in full and led us on to many great projects and accolades that I won't go into right now. Chad holds an undergraduate degree in botany and anthropology, a JD, and has completed graduate coursework in education, biology, statistics, and the geosciences, as to why he really has such a huge knowledge base. His technical expertise has driven the broadband initiative. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and let the panel talk. I'm going to turn to Rachel first and let her give a very high overview of the study and the initiative. Go ahead.
Thank you, Monique, and just thank you for everybody attendance today. We appreciate your participation in this event, and we look forward to continue the partnership in Acadiana and expound upon what the work that we've already begun. So just to talk a little bit about the Acadiana Broadband Assessment 2021, and really to focus in on the role of the planning district and why we got involved to begin with. And we often, as a planning district, we help our local jurisdictions and to solve different problems that come up. And sometimes I think, how did we get involved in some of these problems, fixing drainage and, becoming a little bit of an expert in everything and really understanding the true problems and helping to develop solutions. And so when we were asked to take on this broadband initiative, I was like, sure, we'll fix your broadband as well as drainage and a few other things. So, it's really, even though it's a complex subject, I think the significance of this is really understanding the components that are involved with broadband, and that's really what we did in our report, is to break it down so that the average person, whether it's an elected official, somebody that's already in the field, or just your general public that really wants to understand the nuances and the terminology that's used in this industry, so that we could better relate to allowing them to understand what they have what they need and where they need to be in the future, because you don't know what you need until there's some sort of reference point. And so here in Acadiana, we have the best of both worlds, and we say this often. We have Lafayette with LUS Fiber that has fiber to the home, and certain areas in the region have fiber to the home, but then you get out into areas like Evangeline Parish where there's just this great divide. And really that was the intent, is to really understand what is the divide that exists, the digital divide that exists within our region. And so with the assessment, we took a look at the different broadband speeds. We broke down the broadband 101 fundamentals so that we can understand what does it mean to be served, what does it mean to be unserved, what does it mean to be underserved, because those terminologies can just be so complex if you don't understand how to break that down. And then really to look at where do we need to be in the future. And at the end of the day, where we landed from a planning district perspective, and what we've heard many of our parish presidents say, is that this is about economic survival for the future, right? This is, we often hear about much of the public utilities that are needed in order to attract businesses and to retain our businesses. And even though this is not necessarily classified as a public utility, this is definitely one of the major critical infrastructure components that's needed in order to ensure that our economic survival and our economic growth is viable as a region. And so we look to, in the broadband assessment, we really wanted to develop partnerships that can enhance the science and enhance the conversation. So we brought along UL, and actually I want to say a special thanks to Dr. Anna Oslin as well. She was part of the team that helped put this together to really look at the digital divide from an educational perspective, from a poverty characteristics with it, and then also just and what Stephen, what Gary will tell us a little bit about is the differences in speeds and the connection of economic growth, and why it's so critical, why we've been championing fiber to the home, why we have been championing higher speeds to ensure that we have a chance to survive moving forward into the future. And so that's, from a high-level perspective, all of the components that we put into the broadband assessment. You all have your QR codes. I would encourage you to take a look at it, and we really break down, and Chad will get into it a little bit more, but we critically looked at each parish to really say, what is the average speeds that we're getting in the parish? What does the infrastructure capacity look like? What the supporting infrastructure that's needed and required? And then also looking more in depth about just general digital divide characteristics. So just, thank you to all those team members who worked on this report, especially our team at Acadiana Planning Commission, and then also with the work at UL. We appreciate it, and we hope that you can enjoy the report as much as we did.
Yes, so I would say this before I turn it to Gary. We had very strong instincts very early on that we were making decisions today that will decide which towns will be here in 10 years. And we could pick Abbeville, or we could pick Opelousas, or we could pick Ville Platte. But whoever we don't invest in today, because of the increase of demand on bandwidth and speeds from our technology development, they will not survive in the future. So we knew that, we were saying that, and it sounds good, but what we needed was meat. We needed real data to help us tell that story, and that's where Dr. Gary Wagner came in, and I'm going to turn it over to Gary and let you tell them about your work. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Monique, and I want to thank you for taking a few minutes of your time to join us today. I also want to thank Monique, Rachel, and Chad, and the Acadiana Planning Commission for bringing me onto the project. I'm going to talk a little bit about broadband and job growth in Louisiana. It's 5 to 7 minutes. If you have the report in front of you, or if you have the QR code, the key table that I'm going to kind of lead you up to is table 19, or page 19 in the report. You might want to take a look at that. But I tried to answer just a very broad question, which is, does broadband affect job growth? And so we know from a lot of other studies that broadband has been linked to many other economic outcomes related to health, education, and workforce. However, it's a little bit surprising. The number of studies linking broadband to job growth have been somewhat sparse. And I think one of the reasons is it's kind of an elusive question, because the direction of causality is something that we need to dig a little bit deeper to understand. So is it broadband leading to job growth, or is it areas with faster job growth having a response and seeing broadband responding to that? So one of the things I try to do in this study is tease out that direction of causality, and I think I've managed to do that. isolating the effect that broadband has on job growth in Louisiana. And so the way that I'm doing this, I'm looking at a 5-year period of time from 2014 to 2018, and I'm not, in a sense, cherry picking the dates. 2014 is the earliest date that we have very granular data on broadband download speeds. And 2018 is the latest date that we have very granular data on jobs. So this is the most recent data that we have, and I'm measuring broadband by the average business download speed. And I'm using what's called a census block group as the unit of geography. So there are over 3,400 census block groups in the state of Louisiana, so you can get a sense of how small a level of geography that I'm looking at. And I'm trying to look at broadband speed in this very small level of geography and job growth in this very small level of geography to see how these are related. And I'm going to measure jobs based on the physical location of the employer. So this is not based on where somebody might actually live, but it's based on the quarterly unemployment forms that employers fill out. And so we know down to a very detailed level where these jobs are physically located. The kind of key piece of the study, though, without getting into too much details, we know there are a lot of different things that can affect job growth beyond broadband. So these are all of the other factors that I have taken into account. And you can see some of these I can measure at a block group level. Some of them, the lowest level of geography, I can measure them at as a parish level. But I'm taking into account how many jobs it had in 2014, the job growth over the previous 5 years, the number of oil and gas wells that are there, the number of patents that have been awarded. You can see the share of jobs that are in STEM-related fields. So a number of these other factors that we might think would relate to job growth. And here's kind of the key finding is I do a number of things that I'll spare you the gritty details, but there is a very strong positive relationship between average business download speeds in Louisiana. And in fact, just to kind of stick a number to it, every 10% increase we get in the average business download speed, we get about 0.6% higher job growth, taking into account all those other things. And so that number may not mean a lot to you because it's kind of hard to think about that in context. So here's another way to think about that. And this is the table that's in the report on page 19. So these are the number of jobs in Acadiana in 2018, about 252,000. Over that 5-year period, the region lost about 31,000 jobs. The column on the right is showing you the estimated number of jobs because of the expansions in broadband. In other words, we have about 20,000 additional jobs over that 5-year period because of the expansion of broadband. So one way of thinking about this, jobs are about 8% higher in the region because of expansions in broadband. Or alternatively, as I mentioned, the region lost about 31,000 jobs. We would have lost 50,000 had we not expanded broadband at a faster pace. So this is a really strong relationship, and I think broadband these are numbers obtained not just from looking at Acadiana, but looking at the entire state and then extrapolating. And so I think there's very strong evidence here that some of these regions that are struggling can increase the number of jobs and increase standards of living by having faster business download speeds. So that's just a quick summary, and that's all I have on this issue.
Okay, next, I'm going to let, are you finished, Gary? Okay. Gary also did, which he's not presenting today, a look at the impacts on migration and out-migration, and definitely found relationship there as well. But that's in the report also. Chad Lacone is now going to talk to us in more depth about the findings in the report.
Okay, when we first ventured out on this endeavor in writing the grant for USDA, we naively thought we could just basically do a cataloging of where broadband was and wasn't, and with the existing data sets, and then determine, what areas needed broadband because there just were these areas that didn't exist. When we started digging into the problem, we realized it was much more complex than that. And in fact, it took us about a year to really get our arms around it. And we retooled and recalibrated, and the first thing we started to look at was really what does consumer demand look like on a national level, and realizing that if we aren't able to at least be on par with the average of the rest of the country, we're not going to become competitive economically. And that bears out with the information that Dr. Wagner has presented, both in job growth and out-migration. The kicker here is, and this is closely tied to the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which first defined and really set out what broadband is. Initially, the federal government, through the FCC, has defined broadband as, and this is in 1996, download speeds, high-speed internet with download speeds of 4 megabits down and 1 megabit up. By the time that came around in 1996, it was already obsolete. The next time that standard was revised was in 2015. In 2015, the median download speeds were 25 megabits, and that's what the consumer experience was. At that time, the broadband definition was revised to a 25/3 standard, 25 megabits download, 3 megabits upload. And that standard has remained through to today, 6 years later. On average, consumer demand for broadband and bandwidth increases by 25% per year, or roughly a doubling time of once every 3 years. By the time we get to 2017, consumer demand for broadband was already, and the median household experience was 96 megabits download. The current proposed standard of 100 megabits is really close to that. And if you go forward from 2017 onward, we've probably already exceeded that proposal. The reality is, if we don't shoot high, and this is kind of a take-home point from the study, we're going to be obsolete by the time we start deploying. The other thing we took a hard look at is the technologies that are available out there and what they're capable of delivering. And we looked at every type of connection from the start of broadband, which was everything from DSL to cable, which are copper-based technologies, to wireless broadband, or wireless fixed point broadband, which are called our WISPs. And ultimately, we concluded that based on the physical limitations of the technologies, copper versus fiber versus wireless, that the only one technology that could be able to continue to sustain the growth in demand would be fiber. And from that perspective, we started looking at what the consumer experiences were within each of our parishes. The take-home point here is most of our parishes, more than half of, outside of Lafayette, more than half of our residents are experiencing download speeds less than that 25/3 standard. That's based on our speed test data, which we conducted because we could not get accurate data from other sources, as well as from sources like Ookla, MLabs, and Microsoft. The kicker here is our most rural parishes like Evangeline, St. Landry, and the northern parts of Acadia Parish had the worst experiences. And if you notice on the charts that Dr. Wagner presented, those parishes were the ones that were actually experiencing negative job growth, out-migration, and a loss of population. From a practical standpoint, looking at both the data and the experience, and comparing it with consumer demand, it's not surprising that we have large portions of our jobs leaving our region and a large numbers of our residents seeking better fortunes elsewhere. Another kicker to look at and something to think about is cost. While broadband is widely available throughout our region, it's not always cost effective for somebody to subscribe to it. And part of our study, we looked at and hosted a series of focus groups with key stakeholder groups. Those included representatives from the economic development world, education, and healthcare. Consistently, they reported that at their institutions, with the exception of the business sector, for healthcare particularly and education in particular, they had adequate access to broadband at their homes. However, they were not able to reach the majority of their patients or students because their students lacked adequate broadband access at home. It wasn't so much a technology issue as an actual physical infrastructure. Most of our school systems have been able to ramp up the purchase of devices, so the device limitation that was once a problem for home access was no longer one, particularly one during COVID. And for our older residents, broadband becomes kind of a double jeopardy hit. Our older residents, anybody, and when I say older residents, I'm including myself in the category, anybody over 50 doesn't have the level of computer literacy that the younger folks who have gone through an education system their entire lives that pushes computer literacy. Computer literacy has been a part of the state curriculum since about 1998, and pretty much everybody who's matriculated through school, which, you know, if you put our ages around there, during that time period, has got a good comprehensive understanding of basic internet services and how to use a computer. Our older folks, however, are the ones that are hardest hit and have not had the luxury of that educational experience. Getting computers to them, getting them online, and showing them the need to be online was illustrated most acutely by the access to telehealth services during the COVID pandemic. During the pandemic, our hospitals reported that the critical issue for them was actually getting their patients online to make online appointments when they could not do them in person. So, you know, as a summary, from an economic survival standpoint, and this just came out through one of our economic development focus groups, it's not so much about not only competing nationally, but it's also just basic functioning locally. And one of our economic development professionals coined that phrase. For many of our businesses, and it's not just anecdotal, we actually spoke to these people directly and recorded it in the study. They aren't able to run credit card machines and telephones at the same time. And that's a fundamental issue. I mean, another example is one of our small towns has such bad broadband access that their police department has been without phone and internet service from a week or two at a time, 5 times over the last 18 months. Now, from a public health and safety standpoint, that's unsustainable. And we need to take a hard look at what we're doing, where we're doing it, and how we are doing it.
Yes, thank you, Chad. So I want to reemphasize what Chad said, because we are not looking to fulfill the technological needs of today, because we're dealing with government money. And that's what we do all the time. And the reality is it doesn't move that fast. So if it takes us, let's say, 3 years to get through the grant process, get the funding, get it to the providers, get the supply chain moving as far as fiber, and actually get it in, it's going to take us at least 3 years, maybe 5 years, to really get everything installed in the ground, the way, or on the poles, whatever it is. And I'm gonna repeat what he said. There is an expected 25% increase in technology demand every year. So if we fulfill the needs of today, we will be obsolete by the time we execute, which is just a bad faux pas for government. So what we're looking at is future-proof technology. We're looking at fiber to the home only in Acadiana, and really trying to work with our governments as well as our providers to say, what do we need to do to make it happen? And that's really our underlying initiative. And so thank you very much, Chad. And then Dr. Barnes. I'm going to let Dr. Barnes give an overview of everything from his perspective, and really thank him for his participation in this.
Well, thank you, and thank you also for including the Blanco Center in this work and having me here today. And when you started, you mentioned applying for this grant about 2.5 years ago, and when I think about everything that we've learned in working through this, it's really remarkable how fast the world of broadband is changing and how critical broadband has become. I think as we've really dug deeper into this issue at the Blanco Center, it's really quite striking how critical broadband has become as a service. So we heard from Dr. Wagner's work on the important role that broadband plays in the economy, both from a business perspective, but also from a population perspective as a quality of life factor, as access to critical services. And those things work together to change how we think about economic development, with broadband really being a central part of that conversation. As important as it has become, I want to revisit something that Rachel mentioned earlier, some of the work that's in this report, helping to really underscore some of the key factors related to the digital divide. And so when we think about some of the long-standing challenges that we see in the Acadiana region and more broadly across Louisiana, related to equality, challenges on educational attainment, how that relates to income and poverty, and all of that ties back to affordability for this critical service. We can also see racial as well as the urban and rural geographic divide there, and those disparities as something that certainly warrants attention and something that needs to be a focus of local government, state government, to make sure that we're bringing broad access to provide opportunities to our population, but also at a macroeconomic level to help drive future economic growth. I think, Chad covered several examples of just how critical broadband is to several different sectors. I want to revisit the education piece of that, and putting some data behind this so that we can begin to really appreciate just how central this is. So looking back to 2020, when the public education system and education more broadly really had to shift to largely remote, or at least a hybrid operating environment, only about 68% of Acadiana's K-12 students had confirmed home internet, leaving 32% lacking similar access. And we think about the challenges that we've seen for decades, trying to figure out how we can increase educational attainment, how we can keep kids in school and give them economic opportunities for a lifetime. These kinds of obstacles that can get in the way of maintaining access to education, and giving our systems a little more resilience to flex and to respond and to be able to weather the storms, figuratively and literally. That kind of access is a real challenge. And it's not just the students, even amongst teachers. 1 in 10 teachers did not have internet access or computer access to be able to teach virtually during the pandemic. So these are some of the things that we highlight in this report, to really drive home just how critical it is that we take very seriously broad expansions and making sure we're doing these things at a high level. I'll share even in areas that have more widespread access to internet, you can then see how that becomes integrated into the educational process. So students that have Chromebooks and generally have access to internet or an option to find internet at a local library or relative's house, that then becomes an expectation for homework. Students go home and are expected to complete homework. It's really integrated into their educational process. And so we've got to make sure that we're not just opening up access, but we're building it in a way that's going to be robust and resilient, that's going to be reliable, because it really has become a daily requirement of success in education and in the economy. I'll also draw out a few other anecdotes about thinking about specific ways that this has become so important in the economy. We saw during the pandemic a lot of kind of firsts. So over the last 20 years, there's surely been this sort of gradual, incremental, expanded use of the internet to help make things happen. During the pandemic, we saw large petrochemical plants starting to bring in virtual reality as a new training method to help get employees up to speed and ready to work, something that entirely and critically depends on broadband access. And we can also see a movement towards greater use of remote control and operations of facilities to be able to monitor and be able to make adjustments on the fly. All of these things, again, not just require some level of access to the internet, but require high-speed, robust, and resilient access. And then to put some data behind another major trend that I know you've all heard plenty about, if not experienced to some extent yourself, when we look at remote work, you may be surprised to know just how prevalent this had been before the pandemic. So in 2019, about 22% of workdays were done remotely in America. So if that's not typical in your communities or not your experience throughout Louisiana, this is a trend that was really happening in a pretty notable way. In 2020, after the initial lockdowns, when people were able to get back to work at some level, a lot of those local and state restrictions have been lifted throughout the country. Late into 2020, those numbers had stayed at a much higher rate of about 42%. So significant expansion of remote work, which is certainly a trend that is here to stay. And I think when we think about expanded reliance of broadband in the way businesses operate, and especially the way that broadband allows the workforce to have so much more flexibility in where they locate, where they live. You know, we've seen decades and decades of cities continuing to grow and bring those the economy together, bring human capital together, because that was the way to interact, to have the meeting of the minds and to innovate. But over the last year and a half, we've really seen a transformation there where the technologies that we've been developing for decades have matured to a point where we can really rely on them more broadly if we have high quality broadband. So I also see this as something that offers a tremendous new opportunity for smaller communities and rural communities in particular. As you think about families and individuals and young talent that may have left because that was the way to find the right job, there's certainly a much broader opportunity today to leverage remote work and cultivating your communities as a place for high quality of life to help bring some of those folks back, hold on to population, really look at that as a key part of economic development. So, but again, all of that hinges on high quality broadband.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. And something did come to mind. When he spoke about 32% of the students not having internet access at home, you know, we often hear in the conversations out in throughout Louisiana about why we're last on this list and that list, and poverty is one of those statistics that never falls well for us. And sometimes I wonder why, because we really have a lot of good elements to life here. You know, lifestyle piece, we have good people, we have communities stronger than most throughout the country. So why do we keep holding that poverty statistic so low? Well, and I'm going to say it again, was it 32 or 30% of students without internet in the home? 32. One of the things that Kathleen Babineau-Blanco used to say often was that the single greatest solution to poverty is education. But 32% of our kids can't get on the internet. So we can keep asking all kind of different questions, but if we don't address basic infrastructure, education is we're only gonna fall further behind. I mean, we're already behind, right? But we're gonna get further behind. I mean, the implications are tremendous. And so that's one side of the spectrum. And then the other side of the spectrum that Stephen spoke about so eloquently is the opportunities that we create for the educated portion of our population. You know, the opportunity to bring them home and to have them work remotely. Remote work is, I know a lot of key executives in Fortune 500 companies that are living here right now because they can in Lafayette. But if they're from Ville Platte, and that's my poster child, sorry, Mayor Vidrine, they can't stay in Louisiana. They have to go back to Cleveland or wherever their headquarters is. You know, so we're missing opportunities every day by not having the infrastructure. Big opportunities, and then both sides of the spectrum, let me say that. Okay, so with that, so we've identified the problem right, and we've identified where we want to go, and the other thing that's happening is the state really has a keen understanding of the implications of broadband. Governor Edwards has really taken steps over the last 2 years to put together a broadband commission, to put together an office, and to hire a director. And so, you know, we have Vineeth Iyengar, I mentioned him earlier, here today, and he's going to talk to you. Vineeth, I guess this past February, was appointed by the governor to serve as the first executive director of broadband development and connectivity for the state of Louisiana. That is a big job. We have complexities here in Acadiana, and we're probably ahead of the game statewide. And so his job is even greater than what we present to you in our region. Vineeth previously served as the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer for Mayor President of Baton Rouge, Sharon Weston Broome. He was raised in Baton Rouge, has a robust business and entrepreneurship experience both domestically and internationally, having served as a United States Peace Corps volunteer shortly after 9/11, a healthcare executive for Baltimore-based Sage Growth Partners, and as a staff member in the office of the Honorable Robert Mosbacher, Jr., former CEO of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation in Washington, D.C. He earned a bachelor's degree in economics from Purdue University and a master's of science in finance from Johns Hopkins University. And I really want to thank Vineeth. He's here today, but he's here often, and he's there whenever I text him, and sometimes late at night and early in the morning. And he's also always up for a good, I guess, debate, healthy debate. So thank you. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to let you talk about the state's efforts, because this is really how we're going to do it, right? We've identified what we want, and there's different funding opportunities, but being a part of the state effort is important, and it's critical, and I'm going to let Vineeth tell you about that. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Monique, and really thrilled to be here, actually to be back in Lafayette. I started my role, March 29th. And I remember, so that was a Monday, and then I remember on a Wednesday, I went to Grant Parish, and then on Friday, I think I went to Tangipahoa, and then the following Tuesday, which was day 7 on my job, came here actually to Lafayette for that big conclave you had at LITA's offices. So really, Lafayette and the Acadiana region was my first real visit in this job. And I remember the media. I know we did some media interviews, and I remember the caption was, I came in this job really wide-eyed and didn't realize what I really got myself into. 5.5 months later, I continue to be wide-eyed, but not because of the complex and the challenges that we have, but I come in wide-eyed from the perspective of the fact that we have moved significantly in addressing some of the challenges that were talked about in just 5.5 months. And I'll start to articulate what those are. First is, we're grateful to the leadership that Monique, you have, and the Acadiana Planning Commission, and the folks that were on this panel, and sort of being the tip of the spear as a region and as a planning commission to really identify broadband as singularly a top of mind issue. So that's really a kudos. In the last 5.5 months, we've probably visited close to half the state's parishes, and since July 30th, we've had over 20% of the parishes and a number of the small towns, including Ville Platte, identify their digital navigator, their point of contact, but also their broadband team. And really, we've had parishes from Allen Parish, Bossier, Sabine, East Carroll, identify that broadband is a top of mind issue, and they're doing the things that they're doing to get organized locally. So just to recap and articulate, when we're talking about the digital divide challenge that exists in the state of Louisiana, it's really not just an access issue, but it's also an affordability issue, and it is, as Chad said, a computer literacy, digital literacy issue, right? And so we have to work in concert at the same time, not in sequence, but at the same time in addressing all 3 of those challenges and to eliminate all 3 of those challenges by 2029. So, as I tell often, I could make Acadiana Parish the most wired parish in the world. But if the people can't fundamentally afford it, neither do they have digital literacy to really understand the best uses of broadband to help improve their lives and generate the kind of jobs we want, then really it's a wasted investment. So we have to attack all 3 at the same time. So when we talk about digital literacy, we did some back of the envelope math, and we think there's an upper bound number of 462,000 people between 18 and 64 years old that lack basic functional computer skills. And that is between not just older folks, but between 18 and 64. We've broken that data down on a per parish basis, and that's data that we could share with all of you on a per parish basis, okay? In fact, Glenn Howie Jr., who is on our team, who's our senior policy analyst, by the way, he's the pride of Acadiana. He's on our team. His folks are from Crowley. Help piece together that analysis. And it's data we're happy to share with all of you to understand, again, on a per parish basis, what's the size of that digital literacy problem and challenge. The second, when it comes to affordability, we have a big affordability challenge in the state of Louisiana. We have 43.6% of folks that lack the ability due to structural poverty issues that can't afford it. And so that's an issue that we have to rapidly solve. Now, the fortunate thing is the federal government has, through the Emergency Broadband Benefit Program that we helped push out on this past May 12th, we have seen significant traction among Louisianians who've already benefited from that program. In fact, we get on a weekly basis a report from the FCC, and since May 12th, we've had over 140,000 Louisianians already benefit from receiving $50 a month off their broadband bills, and $75 a month should you live on tribal areas. And so that program, there's significant and ample financial resources behind that program. There's still billions of dollars left on the table for all Louisianians to benefit. And what we've done to addressing the affordability issue and to understand some of the challenges on a zip code area basis is we have data that can help share with all of you guys what we think is the affordability challenges on a zip code area basis and where there's ample room for growth. And then on access, I don't have to belabor the challenges that we have for access. But what I want to do is talk about very specific solutions, right? And so we, through the legislature and really working with Monique and working with the providers and working with the co-ops, working with Louisiana Municipal Association, working with the Police Jury Association, we've come up with a really good start towards the framework of a broadband grant program, which we call Gumbo. We have $177 million for that grant program. The first $90 million has already been authorized. Its rules and scoring criteria for that program is currently on our website, connect.la.gov, and we have pushed out the deadline we pushed out the start date for that grant program to November 1 of this year, with a deadline of December 31st of this year. We're giving ourselves a shot clock of a couple of years to not only commit that money, but to spend that money. Really, it's within a 2.5 year period. We have a shot clock to spend that money effectively by December of 24, which doesn't give us a whole lot of room nor time to execute, which is a good thing. And so what we want to do is incentivize cost-efficient, and cost-efficient deployments that are scalable. And that scalability is key, as Monique said, because the last thing we want to do is invest grant money in projects that we're going to have to rip and replace should the infrastructure bill happens and go into the future. And so really whatever we invest in is going to really incentivize high speeds, preferably fiber to the home, if not 120, and at the bottom threshold 25/3 speeds, okay? Worst sort of floor, worst case scenario. And so that money, again, we plan to make the awards, or to at least announce the awards mid-March of next year, so right before the legislative session, and then it becomes a sprint towards execution and rollout of that first 90 million. And then I think by the end of Q2 is when we roll out the second tranche of that financial money. This is where we'd like to get APC's help on, and all of you. And we're grateful that we have, the president here, the chancellor of LSUE, and with community college representative and folks in general. Supply chain is going to be an issue, and we've talked about this, Jay, right, a number of times. Supply chain of plastics, the resin, anything and everything supply chain is going to be an issue. We have bubbled up the supply chain issues to the National Economic Council and the White House, and so they are made aware of that. And something to keep in mind as we continue to roll this out. Because if our goal in Gumbo is to invest in cost-efficient deployments, then that's a problem that we're going to have to solve very quickly. So we're having conversations with Secretary Pearson at LED and others in the industry to understand the sizing of that supply chain challenge and what it means for folks that we deploy some of this competitive grant money to. So one thing to keep in mind. The second is workforce. Workforce is going to be an issue. And it's going to be an issue. It's an issue right now. I mean, let's just be honest. It was an issue before the pandemic. It's an issue now. And it's going to be a greater issue, especially when the parishes, towns, and municipalities are getting infrastructure dollars to co-equally invest in water and sewer. Fundamentally, this is construction work. This is maintenance work. And so we're having conversations with Monty Sullivan at LCTCS and others to understand how quickly we could roll out classes around fiber installation, anything that's broadband related. So something to keep in mind as a region to understand that workforce is going to be somewhat of an issue, but we have solutions and we can obviously solve it with working together. A couple of other things that I wanted to highlight. Dr. Wagner talked about the economic and societal benefits to broadband, and he talked about it from the perspective of quality place, the impact it's having on healthcare outcomes, et cetera. But some really interesting statistics that I wanted to share with respect to broadband, but also overall digital skills, digital tools. And we've talked about this, Monique, a number of times about the importance of empowering our small businesses that fundamentally have to make the shift to using digital tools, credit card processing to make payments and to also receive payments, right? And so the U.S. Chamber recently did some really interesting analysis with the Amazon that stated that if, as a state, we were to significantly improve the digital skilling, the digital tools application, and then broadband in general as the mechanism to deliver both skills and tooling, then we're thinking about already 4,888 jobs created, $200 million in annual wages created, 1.5 billion in economic value created, and that's significant. If you think about the broadband infrastructure itself, right, the maintenance, the construction, the FCC put out a report, and so I'm not talking about the long-term impacts of broadband from an economic development play, but the short-term over the next 3 years. The FCC feels that not just specific to Louisiana, but the country itself would create an additional 20,000 jobs just in terms of the jobs created in construction and maintenance, and the customer service that's going to be related towards providing service to those that now have broadband. And so, look, the lessons learned over the last 5.5 months, especially in our role, is that we're operating under the same level and sense of urgency that the folks have. When folks that we go to, and I think Chad or one of you guys talked about the police stations and police departments that have to, in essence, ration out broadband. I mean, that's really painful to us. We were in Tullis, Louisiana. I don't know if anyone knows where Tullis, Louisiana is. Anyone know where that is? You know where that is. Town of what, 300 people? And they don't have, the police department doesn't have functioning broadband, right? That is painful to us. When we hear from families throughout the parish who cannot facilitate a telehealth visit because they cannot, nor do they understand how to fix an appointment, that's painful to us. When we talk to farmers who lack the understanding what to do with the importance of broadband and its inability to impact crop yields, especially when prices are going down, despite acreage going up, that's painful to us. And so operating with that same sense of urgency is sort of the thesis and sort of the way culturally our office is operating. And so within the last 5 months, as Monique said, we've traveled the state, we've spent significant times understanding the issue. We are heartened and really pumped up when we have meetings like this, when there's significant traction, even for an office in a government agency, that significant movement has been made over the last couple of months. And we have designed the grant program, Gumbo, to focus on, again, cost-efficient, scalable deployments. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about, and then maybe I'll have Glenn talk a little bit about the rules and scoring criteria for Gumbo. Should the infrastructure bill pass, that's going to be a good chunk of significant money for us as well. At minimum, if the infrastructure bill passes, and I think we're going to know more over the next week, I think September 27th, there may be a proposed vote. Every state of Louisiana, well, every state, including Louisiana, gets $100 million off the bat for broadband. Then, based on a formula that it takes into account high-cost areas, number of unserved population, folks that have broadband, non-broadband speeds based on varying different speeds, then based on that formula, and I would consider Louisiana being a high-cost state, because I think even in RDOF, on a per passing, per location, we're one of the highest cost areas, we will then get a good chunk of more money. So the way it works is $100 million. We then have to put together a plan, similar to the plan that you've developed, Monique, in your book. We have to put together a plan from a statewide perspective on what we plan to do with the significant amount more money that may come. And that significant more amount of money is going to be significant to help us address the access issue. We then have to look at, once we do get that money, what we can use that money for. Because one of the things that we've learned is, especially coming out of Ida, and look, hurricane season is not over, but we're 9 months away from the beginning of the next hurricane season, okay, which is scary. We have to start to think about resiliency, and we need to start thinking about how we can best harden the infrastructure so that we don't run into issues that have bubbled up, especially with Ida, which has been centered around communications, right? Both wireless and fixed wireline. So those are some of the things that we need to start thinking about should the infrastructure bill pass, as we start to plan out for that next evolution of our broadband efforts. So with that, happy to answer any questions. And again, Glenn is our master designer of our rules and scoring criteria. So if you have any problems with the rules and scoring criteria behind Gumbo, you could throw any shoes at him, right? No, but he's done a great job, and we were really pleased to support APC's application to the NTIA program. We're bullish that the $29 million or some aspect of that will be granted, and hopefully we'll know in November, and that'll be a big win for the region and for the state. With that, I'll hand the conversation over. Okay.
Okay. Sure. I'm gonna invite the panel to come back down, and we'll open it up to Q&A and Vineeth is gonna join the panel as well. And why don't you pull up a chair in case this, okay, if there's questions in particular on the grant application process. Okay. So do we have a floating microphone?
We'll probably take one of these
Mayor Vidrine, did I turn it on?
Thank you, Vineeth, for the and the panel for all of the great information. My question is to you, Glenn, before I have to throw my shoes at you, really to go over the scoring points and the scoring categories for the Gumbo grant.
Elaborate on Gumbo as a whole.
Yeah. So from an overhead perspective, As Vineet stated earlier, you know, the true incentive, or what we tried to do with Gumbo, was faster builds with faster speeds at the lowest possible price point to affect the most number of households. At its core, that's what it's about. Specifically to the scoring criteria, there are 23 different metrics, okay, in the scoring criteria. To name them all 23 in a row, I probably can't do exactly right now, but I can tell you that they cover experience, okay, financial wherewithal of the private provider that's the main applicant. And that's one thing that comes up often. Sometimes there's a little bit of confusion when we go on the road. The primary applicant for the Gumbo grant program is the private provider, okay? A local parish, municipality, or school board can serve in a partnership role with a private provider for the program through either letters of support for a particular project area, matching fund contributions through ARP funding that was available to local municipalities and parishes, or through in-kind contributions. So those are the ways that the local governments can assist and be a partner in the application process: letters of support, matching fund contributions to the project, or in-kind contributions. But as strictly for the scoring criteria, it's 23 different criteria: experience, financial wherewithal, speeds, as a result of the project, number of households impacted, quite a few different ones. The point ranges are anywhere from 8 to 150 or more. And the reason for that is there is no cap on the dollar amount that parishes or municipalities can match. So the more matching that's involved, the more points the application will receive. It's a competitive application program, so obviously you want to try to maximize the points when possible to try to get your project area funded. And there's no, again, with the matching piece, with no cap, the points in theory are unlimited up to the cost of a project. But yeah, I can answer more specific questions if you have some.
Does a municipality have to have a written partnership or agreement with the private provider?
So that depends on what you're going to do. If the local governmental unit, which again, it can be the parish, the municipality, or a school board, the Act provides for those three units of government to function as partners. If you're going to do a letter of support, that does not require an agreement. You can just simply provide the letter of support. If you're going to, and this is detailed within the rules, but if you're going to extend and go beyond that and do potentially matching funds or in-kind contributions, you should want to look at having a written agreement for that. Yes.
Now, where can the private provider get all of the information about the Gumbo grant from?
Yeah, so connect.la.gov. The emergency rule was declared August 12th, so it's been almost a month and a half. We haven't had too many, actually no complaints yet, which is a good sign. It'll really get tested starting November 1st, probably. But again, at connect.la.gov, the emergency rule is linked. They can download it there, and it's very detailed. Although the application portal, which we're still sort of under construction, everything that a private provider will need is laid out within that emergency rule. And so the municipalities, the parishes, and the private providers can definitely get ready, and so November 1 should be able to be ready to go ahead of time.
And just to piggyback off what Glenn said, it is not a requirement
Correct.
for the provider, who is the applicant, to consult with the parishes, towns, municipalities, okay? So we may see an application from company X that says, I want to provide broadband to, folks in Tenshaw Parish. And there's no accompanied letters of support, et cetera. Okay, we will evaluate that application as is. What we strongly encourage, however, is that, look, at the end of the day, these companies, the private sector companies, are investors in your towns and parishes. And so it is critical that they work and consult with you, because part of, again, cost-efficient, scalable, quick deployments is part of that is incumbent upon the local leaders to get everything ready, whether it's permitting, right-of-ways, or whatever, to ensure that that project gets done quickly. And the reason is this: we have within Gumbo a clawback measure, because what we want to make sure is that projects that are done on time, again, look, at the end of the day, this is your money that we're returning back to the community, right? Taxpayer dollars. So we have a clawback in the bill that says if the project is not getting completed in a certain period of time based on the agreement between the provider and us and the community, then we have the right to claw that money back or that asset. So that's why it's critical everyone's on the same page in terms of expectations, roles, permitting, where the government needs to come in, and so on and so forth.
Can any of the gumbo funding be used by a private company to develop and train a workforce?
Specifically training, as it's written right now, no.
It's really focused on access, and it's really the focus is less on middle mile, though we know that that's going to have to be on a case-to-case basis. Really, we have to incentivize folks to go and provide high-speed internet skewing towards fiber to the home to the last mile, to the last household. Now, there are tons of other grants focused on computer literacy. There's parishes, towns, and villages in Louisiana are getting money. They have money from the American Rescue Plan that they can prioritize, of course, water, sewer, broadband, and within broadband, they could spend it on infrastructure, affordability, digital literacy, and to hire consultants to do pre-development work, leading to last mile connectivity. So that's an option. That's one option. The second is there's tons of federal grants, again, focused on specifically computer skills and digital skills. The third is that there's a lot of foundations and there's a lot of companies that have approached us asking to get involved in digital literacy. And so what we could provide, again, from our office is directional data on the size of the digital literacy challenge on a per parish basis. And one of the things that we've talked about is identifying a couple of parishes in the state of Louisiana that we, as in our office, Connect LA, would work with the Board of Regents, the local public librarians, to roll out a program called North Star Literacy that we would help fund to help kickstart that effort that we could then scale throughout the state of Louisiana. Okay. So again, Gumbo is really focused on incentivizing the infrastructure access piece.
Just trying to connect a couple of the dots here. So broadband was defined, but then we heard quality broadband. And we also heard that 25 was the standard, 25 download speed was the standard from 2015, right? And that we should be somewhere around 100 now, should be the standard, and who knows where it's going to go. If I understood correctly, Gumbo is looking to provide 25. Is that right?
So the FCC.
That's part of my question.
Yeah. So the FCC currently defines broadband as 25 megabits download, 3 megabits upload. I think before the pandemic, that was perhaps marginally suitable, right? I think what we've learned during the pandemic is that there's obviously transmission constraints with those speeds. And so the FCC is going to have to go through a process of evaluating whether those speeds make sense into the future. Now, our Gumbo program, again, is skewed towards really symmetrical speeds of fiber to the home. So we award the most points for those kinds of projects. If someone says, Vineet, I don't think it's necessarily feasible for me to do fiber to the home in Parish X, and they're proposing 120 speeds, that's fine. And if some folks say we're going to submit 25.3 speeds, that's fine. But if we get 3 different proposals from a certain parish or from a provider looking at a different parish, and we look at those 3 and we see fiber to the home, 25.3 and 120, then we're going to skew and give more points to the highest speeds. And the key thing is scalable, because at the end of the day, we have to look at the calculus of if this infrastructure bill passes, and if the infrastructure bill passes, they are focused on scalable technologies. And so whatever we invest in, right, effectively has to be build off these off-ramps that the infrastructure bill would take care of from a technology perspective.
And so the answer is, no, it's not limited to 25.
Correct.
All right. And so if Lafayette, look, 15 years ago, there were conversations like this talking about the digital divide and all of the things that created the political impetus for Lafayette to create Lafayette LUS Fiber. So if there was enough money for all of the homes to buy 25 or 100, pick a number, would the infrastructure that we have in Lafayette today be enough to serve all of that? Is Lafayette, the infrastructure we have here, possibly a model for what other communities might strive to get? Thank you.
I will defer that to my colleagues on the
I will say yes, Andre. And I'm going to ask the people asking questions to introduce themselves. Andre Como. Is Lafayette a model? From our perspective, yes. That's why we're going after fiber to the home region-wide. And, you know, there's different funding availability pots, right? There's state funding, there's federal funding, and each of the federal agencies will have different funding opportunities, and they all define it very differently, right? And the definition of broadband itself may be changing even as soon as before the end of the year. The state funds, I think, are geared to work with the industry. And I guess I just want to clarify this. So we did put, Vineeth mentioned an NTIA application, and in that particular funding pot, wanted a government entity. So there's different ways to do this. And so we strategically, as a quasi-governmental agency, will work as much as we can, right, with the funding pots that want to work with governments. And then we want to help facilitate the private sector providers as much as we can with the state funds. It's going to be a hodgepodge of funding mechanisms. There's not one easy way to fund this thing across the region or the state. But from our perspective, Andre, everything we're doing is really to emulate that model. And here we have a municipal provider, and it does work well here in Lafayette. But we are working, not necessarily looking for the same municipal model to go across the region, but the providers with a similar business model as far as affordable, accessible, and reliable high-speed internet, and take those definitions all the way to the top ceiling.
So I want to add one last thing. Our job within Gumbo is to address access. Just because I get someone access doesn't mean that guy's going to actually pay for it.
Yeah, correct.
It is critical that we continue to beat the drumbeat of the value add, right? Because there are folks, frankly,
The question was, if they could pay for it and did pay for it, would we have enough infrastructure here today to deliver it?
In Lafayette,
I'll take it.
go ahead, Chad.
Right now, LUS Fiber currently provides affordable plans of 10 gigabits to the home, which is 1,000 times faster than what is being proposed. Right now, Lafayette has excess capacity and accessibility at a very affordable rate. And for what you're getting at 10 gigabits here in Lafayette, you can't even get 100 in Bill Platt for the same price. 100 megabits, 1,000 times less.
I'm Carrie with LSU Unison. Just wanted to make a positive statement for Ville Platte. We partnered with their JAG program and were able to certify 24 students in the CompTIA computer program. So there are 24 job-ready folks in Ville Platte from Ville Platte High School JAG program. So they are getting digitally ready in Evangeline Parish and at Ville Platte High. So I just wanted to make
I want to reinforce
positive.
that. And I don't, Ville Platte is one of my favorite places in the state. Literally, I love the people there. And I mean, it is a one, and I don't want to, they usually say, okay, let us be your poster child, because if we can get fiber, we'll do what we have to, basically. So they are my poster child. Right, yeah.
And the reason for y'all who do not know, that we the poster child because we have the 5th slowest internet in the nation.
That's right. That's right.
In the nation.
In the nation. Yeah. So we go on national panels. Chad's done national podcasts, and we beat the drum loud. So a lot of people know about Ville Platte, but it is a wonderful place. So thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yes, they are. And I mean, we are having conversations with the university. You know, Dr. Jeff Stewart has brought his MBA classes up there. This is a tool. This is not the end-all answer, right? But without the tool, you can never get to the end. But once they have the tool, what do we do? And we, I mean, it's a tremendous community. It truly is. Every community meeting I've been to, every planning session, everything, no matter what it's related to, has a room full of people who are passionate about that town, who love that town, and that's what makes it so great. And so we've talking to Dr. Stewart about, you know, bringing another MBA class in there to develop out e-commerce platform for the local artisan or for the antique shop or for, you know, how do we take them very quickly into an e-commerce platform, which they are dying for. They know what it is. They know how it works. They just don't have the tools to do it. So it's getting those tools there that is so important. And then develop, it's not the end all. It is a tool in the toolbox, but it's a critical tool. You know, it's that screwdriver or that hammer that if you don't have, you really can't do your project, right? And so that's where we are. And I do love Ville Platte, Mayor.
Good morning. So being from a school district, we apply for many federal grants. And this is one issue that we have. Many of the grants require a minimum bandwidth to apply for. And what's reported to the FCC and what's in actuality is sometimes a big, broad difference. Would that be looked at in all these?
Yeah.
I was thinking with Rachel, but I'll talk to Mike. We're engaged right now with the Delta Regional Authority through the Delta Speed Test program. And part of the thing to do to challenge those reported FCC results is to actually get people out there taking the test. We need to know what the consumer behavior is, what the consumer experience is, excuse me. The other side of that is it also is heavily technology dependent. So while it's theoretically possible that you have a really, really good DSL connection that's right next to the switching station, the further away, if you're using copper-based technologies you are from your primary switching facilities, the worse your signal is. So the consumer experience, even on the same line, the further away you are from the facilities of the provider, the worse your experience will be. That's why the speed test is so critically important that everybody should be pushing out to your communities so that we know where the pockets of good and bad are.
So in Acadiana, I guess the different funding pots are also looking at the definition of broadband differently. They're also looking at what qualifies that, right? So different mapping techniques and providers and stuff. So for our region, we really have every one of those measures already analyzed in a spreadsheet and willing to share, willing to support any application out there that needs that data. Alicia is our GIS guru, to say the least. She's going to pull up are you pulling up the DRA map?
Well, do you want us to pull out the PDFs or the application?
The speed test, the results or the speed test itself?
Yep.
Glenn's going to elaborate on how the broadband speed test will play into the
Gumbo.
funds.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, and so any of the private providers can utilize any of the speed tests available to sort of supplement their materials that they submit to through the Gumbo program as well.
So Rachel, they're pulling up the report. They're pulling up the report. Is that what you want?
We do have a conglomerate of.
Yeah, let's do the whole parish. It's the broadband speed test, not the report.
Go to connect.la.gov.
So there are different mapping tools being used, like I said, and
So, sorry.
go ahead.
By the way, this is temporary website. It's not the nicest. We're actually launching a brand new website next month, I think, or next couple of weeks. But Mayor, just to your point, everything that you need functionally in terms of the broadband toolkit, we talked about a toolkit, which I think is really useful data. It helps parishes to start getting organized, and as I mentioned, you know, we've had a number of parishes, a number of towns already benefit from an organizing document from this toolkit. This is the DRA speed test, Bell Commission. This is that EBB program, the emergency rules for gumbos here, and other resources that's specific to broadband. Test your internet speed. This is the, if you go, again, this is the speed test. And Chad, did you want to walk the folks?
Let's go ahead and just do it.
What do you guys want to do? Rachel, do you want to handle it? Here.
Yeah. But Rachel, go ahead and walk through one. I think we kind of instructive.
And just to reiterate the significance of this, right now the FCC has certain census blocks codified as served or unserved. But what we'll be able to use in the gumbo funds is be able to take the speed test results and basically verify the speeds that you're actually getting in the area. So even though the FCC is reporting one speed, you need to go and look at those census blocks to see what speeds are they actually getting to basically verify, is that census block eligible for gumbo or not? Is that accurate, a fair statement? Okay. So we'll do a quick run through, enter my exact address.
And so this is a scramble happening across the country because the FCC data does not provide a clear picture. And the FCC itself knows that, and they are trying to change that. They are working hard quickly to try to come up with an accurate depiction of what is being provided. But in the meantime, states and regions, everybody is scrambling to really try to define what's actually being delivered.
I know I'm not putting in the right address.
Is there any indication
It is.
or metrics for the reliability? Because Evangeline, they've got 25 or 100 megs or whatever sensors up there already, but they're only up 1 day a month.
You're asking about the reliability of the speed tests?
No reliability of the service.
Oh.
Well, so. Jay, you want to talk? You're a provider here. I think you're the only provider. Have you got Greg as well?
But
I will shift that
they're not in
conversation.
Evangeline. They're not
I
the
know,
ones
but
providing
they
that
are.
service.
I'm sorry. I was thinking of something else. So many areas have service of that the criteria is 25 or 100.
No, it's not that. It's this.
Right. But we have
DRA
customers
speed
that have
test.
CenturyLink so they can watch Netflix 2 days a month when it's up.
Yes.
And the other 28 days, they're waiting for those 2 days to come up.
Yeah.
There's a data set called Down Detector.
Don't let it get stale.
I don't know how you would verify that on a case-by-case basis, because a lot of things can go wrong. So, I don't know.
So look, that's why everything's a function of technology, right? And I think the equivocation we have for our friends who live in Baton Rouge is challenge that crossing over the river at 1:30 happens every day, which is you have a 4-lane Mississippi River. We're gonna have that problem this afternoon, right? Where you have a 4-lane, 2 lanes Mississippi River Bridge. Why we're skewing towards fiber to the home or high speed is the fact that if we can make that 4-lane Mississippi River Bridge into an 8 to 10 lane, no matter what the population is, it can always be accommodated, right? And so I think similarly, you know, everything is really a function of technology, right? I don't know what Lumen has in certain areas, what AT&T has in certain areas, but that will often be a leading indicator of its ability to support.
Well, that is the major problem with those big providers, and that's part of my horror story with CenturyLink. Who we have, is the fact that they are not investing or spending money in the infrastructure
Right.
of the internet services that they are supplying to build that. I have to,
Yeah,
Or if a power line falls on their line, if they don't get a call from me, and then, you gotta cuss them out in French and English.
right. Mess with Bill Platt.
And next day, they're there. I said, but it shouldn't have to come to that. But
Right.
they do not want to invest in the small rural communities. And they all have this unwritten law where they are not going into this territory, or they're not going into this region. Cox is not going where Centratel is not going where Charter is, all of that promotion. And in the meantime, smaller rural communities are suffering like Bill Platt. That's why I hope all this broadband money that's here, and that was some of the commotion we had with the gumbo bill, about just
Right.
going the way of the big private companies who are really not investing in their infrastructure to provide us with better service.
Right. And Mayor, that is a complex, very real issue. And I would say, if you're going after state money, or if a provider is going after state money, right, and they come to you for a partnership, for even a letter of support, I would not give a letter of support if you do not have an agreement in place. And what those agreements look like, I'm not quite sure. I do think we probably need to get a couple of, strong templates, out there, because you need some protection. This is a lot of government money being put into the private sector, basically. And we don't have guarantees. And so if you're going to put a match up, it's a good idea to put a match up so you can be a participant, so you can have a voice of what this looks like. Because there is, I think you all have been fighting accountability issues, right? And you just hit walls. There are no regulators. There are no checks and balances in this. And we're pouring a lot of money into it. That's taxpayer money. And so looking for those checks and balances in those agreements as a participant is very important.
Well, look, the checks and balances we have is, I mentioned the clawback measure in gumbo. So if we feel, so we're not giving all the money up front. We give 10% of the money once 10% of the project is done. I think it was 10 to 35, 60, 85, and 100%. If we feel at any certain time, and we're going to do sort of mystery shopper, we're going to ask y'all, right? How's it coming? The parishes, are they actually doing what they're doing? We'll send people out just to make sure that projects are getting done. But if we feel that there's something amiss, then again, we have the right to say, look, you said you're going to do this, it's not happening, and then we have the right then to claw that money back.
Yeah, and I guess, Vineet, we put, and Mayor Vadrine is talking, right? So let's go back to Ville Platte. In a town like Ville Platte, you have high poverty levels, the highest in the state, and a small population. And so the business model doesn't change, right? And so even if we go in and put new infrastructure in, and I think that's what's happened with the bigger providers in our small towns, the business model does not allow for the profit margins that they need. And we've worked really well with our local providers throughout Acadiana. They really have strong business models and a strong interest in building our communities. And so that's what the large providers do great things for the state. I don't want to take anything, but in our small communities, those business models, the profit margins they need are hard to match. So, look to your local providers, look to those secure agreements, and be a participant. Put some money into it. I would say put some money into it and be a participant. Right. And technology outdates that agreement real quick.
Exactly. And, every time we pound and pound, I know for sure right now I'm going to say
There's a national security issue.
But that's how many times I have to call them over and over and over again just to supply the services that basic services.
Yeah.
Even at City Hall, my phone system, I'm about to get rid of them with my phone system. Right now, I got one line worker out of 6. Been calling them for months, you know, and now they're saying their equipment, when they installed it, well, way before me, is now antiquated. So there's nothing they can do about that, so we have no choice but to get a brand new phone system. And of course, they come with a contract about, yeah, I'm gonna get a brand new phone system, but you can believe that I will be with you. But I mean, just little situations like that that may seem tedious, but in a small community, that is huge.
Yes.
Especially when they can't get through to their home. So that's the kind of problems that this thing with these big suppliers, that's what we go through. Daily.
Hi, I'm Landry with System Services. Just a quick question about RDOF versus Gumbo. Outside of being federal money versus state money, is there any significant differences between the two?
Well, they're both federal money, right? So RDOF is FCC money. In fact, Jay and Greg, well, they're both recipients of RDOF money, but so the FCC did a reverse auction. Through that reverse auction last fall, awarded 13 companies in Louisiana to build out 175,692 locations, and they've got a 6-year commitment to build out, and so on and so forth. Our money is coming from, our state money is coming from the American Rescue Plan. There's a section of the American Rescue Plan called the Coronavirus Capital Projects Fund, and so that's where our money is coming from. With respect to Gumbo, we are not investing in areas that are already receiving RDOF. Okay, so we're not doing an overlap. Could that change? Maybe, but at this point we're not, for at least for this first round.
And CAF funding.
I'm sorry?
You couldn't get both, RDOF and Gumbo.
No, so like these guys, Greg and Jay, they can apply for Gumbo money, but not in areas.
Not in the same
areas
census
RDOF.
blocks. Right.
So they're gonna have to look outside. Just like if you know, y'all are all fortunate, we're all fortunate that ABC, LUS, and Allen's gets money from the NTIA for your 22,000 plus locations that you've applied for, which, knock on wood, it happens. Then if the same, group or whatever applies for Gumbo, they're gonna have to look at outside those areas.
Right. But I would say if it's happening simultaneous, tick both. I mean, these applications are not simple, so it depends on, what they need. But, we do have a lot of funds coming, and probably for the next 3 to 5 years. That's just kind of like a broad guess from the federal government for broadband. But I would plan out look at your big plan, and we really want providers and communities to be looking at, what capacity do you have, where do you want to be, and how do we support getting you there if it's fiber to the home?
So that's why, look, on a per parish basis, per town, let's just say per parish, let's look at the literacy challenge, and let's come up with some very tactical ways to address it. Let's look at the affordability challenge. There's some immediate ways to addressing the affordability through the emergency broadband benefit program. And then let's look at access. And let's look at unserved, served, the goal is fiber to the home. Then let's look at the funding programs focused on that. And that's the way parish leaders should sort of slice and dice their own digital challenge in their parish.
Monique, I'm Dwight Landreneau from Washington. We're just about 30 miles north and east of my good friend Jennifer Vidrin's town of Ville Platte.
Another great town.
I was born there, so I know it's a great town. Jennifer, you're lucky you got one little phone line working. So, but we live in a small community, less than 1,000 people that are in Washington, Louisiana. We have problems with connectivity, but our main problem is that we don't have the resources and the capability to even match. And when somebody comes to us and says there's $1 million, $500,000, or $20,000, our little community can't even match our portion to participate in any of the grants. So it puts us at a complete disadvantage. I'm not just talking about Washington. There are other small communities in Louisiana who meet the same, I guess, criteria that Washington does. So, you know, Baton Rouge, Lafayette, New Iberia, and Ville Platte, they can meet that match. We can't participate. So what happens is an underserved community even becomes more underserved because we can't take advantage of the monies that are out there. So I don't know how that could be done, or if we can be just tagged on to the larger communities. I was a director of state parks, and not all of our state parks in Louisiana made money. In fact, very few did. But we were able to attach one park to another park and help spread the expenses out and the finances out so that we could still operate these parks that were not meeting the finances that were needed to become profitable. But that's the same thing I see the little town of Washington and you know, my friends from Fort Barry and Grand Prairie, and we have Melville and Leonville and Orneville. All these small communities are in need of these types of advances in technology, but we can't participate because we don't have the match to even put our name in the hat.
So you don't, so that's a layered question. So first is, don't feel obligated that you as a town have to match in order to participate in bringing broadband to your town. And I think that's the responsibility perhaps of partnering with the parish and having the parish take the responsibility, given the amount of resources they're getting, to take that ownership to say, in my parish, these are the areas that are served and unserved, and maybe let them take the responsibility of doing a local match. Now, with respect to Gumbo, the local match can come in the form of hard dollars, right? It could come from any type of funding. I'll tell you, in the case of Grant Parish, I think they're leaning hard in using some of their ARP money to serve as a local match on behalf of the small towns like Ola, I think that's in Grant Parish, Gina, Tullis, et cetera, right? So they're taking on that burden and saying, as a parish, we're going to take on that burden of that local match. The local match can also come in the form of in-kind, right? So anything that's going to leverage resources in a parish, whether water towers, any municipal-owned infrastructure, the financial contribution in terms of perhaps waiving some of those fees could satisfy as a local match. And the third is, with regards to local match from a parish, we purposely did not put in a number, nor did we put in, this is what's required from that parish or from that town. Namely because everyone's financial situation, to your point, is different. And so if someone says, I'm going to put in $1,000, then they'll get points within our scoring criteria. If someone says, I'm going to put in $1 million, then they'll get more points. So the more you give, the better, whether match or in kind.
We're doing some. We now have an excellent IT consultant. He's helped us to bring fiber to City Hall. So now we have some advantages there, and we can use the credit cards, which you never had that before. But now we have to train our personnel to use the technology that we have. We're also setting up an internet cafe. We call it the Bookless Library in one of our buildings. And we had computers donated to us. And like I said, we're trying our best to do what we can with the limited funds and using more or less private funding and donations and that kind of thing to at least give people access to the internet. And we hope to have our Bookless Library in the next 2 to 3 months set up and running.
So what you're doing is exactly what I would do. I mean, to be honest, right? I think it's unfair to small towns to to bear the burden of providing broadband. But I think the approach you're taking is the right approach. In fact, we were talking to a small town in northeast Louisiana where the mayor of that small town, which had less than 1,000 people, I think maybe 700 people, you know, they're partnering with the company to put a little satellite on top of their water tower, and they're thrilled, and it's working out for their small town, right? So, look, anything that y'all can do to show incremental improvement to what we have today is always the big win. And so I think the approach you're taking is the right one.
And
So I went to St. Landry Parish School Board, and just to inform you, Mr. Boudreau, we have applied for the ECF funding. Our first window, we applied for fiber in communities of Palmetto and Melville. The second window opens the 28th, and we will be applying for the Washington, Grand Prairie, and Plaisance area.
And so that is school board funding that will pay for infrastructure, which the school boards really can be critical partners in this as well.
And I think it's critical that the school boards, that school districts and the municipalities are communicating well. One being that we don't want to do federal funds on the same area or project, and you know.
Yeah, that is one area we didn't, I guess, go deep on, but I would say this to every community: get your school boards engaged. They have access to funding from a different perspective, right? But it all needs to be layered and leveraged. Again, this is not one easy solution for any community, but it's kind of a hodgepodge of bringing it all together.
Okay, another thought in terms of match. You do have assets on the ground. For example, and this also goes to from a policy consideration. If you own your water system or your gas system, when you're digging to put in new pipe or line, build in as part of your cost a dig once policy where you put in conduit so that we can come back later in and drag a line for whatever fiber or whatever other type of service we're providing. That investment can be used as a match, and it adds nominally to the cost of the project that you're already doing. The other thing that you may have that you can contribute is right-of-way access or right-of-way. Right-of-way acquisition is an expensive part of a broadband deployment. If you own your right-of-way within your community, that's gold. That's something you could put up as a match. And the third area to look at is the tax costs associated with broadband equipment. There is a statewide program called the Industrial Tax Exemption Program that exempts equipment for industry from taxation. Look into potentially using an ILOT deferral to bring down the cost of operation for long term for those providers that are coming in, and that's also a potential match.
Yeah, so I mentioned here on page 19, this is our broadband toolkit. Identify, as Chad said, vertical assets. You know, as your broadband team, this is really important to us to understand what you guys have locally in your town or parishes. You know, vertical assets can be an important piece of infrastructure to broadband expansion, whether wireless or not. And so here, it's important that you guys identify existing towers, silos, water tanks, buildings. I mean, our argument is if it's tall, you could fix something to it, right? And so I think this is an opportunity to really get creative. You know, and we mentioned here what you guys can do with municipal-owned land or cell towers that could be used to leverage for broadband. And Chad, we mentioned dig once here.
Yes, dig once is huge.
Yeah.
So we have time for one more question, and then we're going to wrap up.
Hi, I'm Chris Disher with Cajun Broadband. We provide fixed wireless and fiber services in much of 9 parishes. I want to congratulate the APZ. The report was excellent and a good starting point for everybody to get their feet on the ground to know what we have to attack. And Vineeth, you and Glenn, your proposal, your grant application is very well thought out and very detailed, and congratulate both of your groups on that. My question is, we're doing our best to reach out to parish presidents, school board presidents, districts, council members, because where we have to get to is understanding the actual census block groups that have the problem, because we know the FCC map is not 100%. It's a good go-to, but it's not 100%. So I try to get to the district
the individual districts understand what the problem is, because we don't want to overlay where there's already an issue, or there's already a solution, so that's a waste of money. So is there a connectivity between APC that we could use as a provider to get to the areas in need and people in need that are raising their hands, like help me, help me, help me? Is there a connection we can use?
So, Rachel?
Sure.
You can actually say pull Alicia back up and she can demonstrate like some of the analysis that we have available. One thing we can do is overlay all of the different speed tests in addition to the FCC data and the DRA information. And that DRA information is going to be gold as those speed tests are coming out.
And so we have developed those mapping products, and they are available with your parish elected officials. We're in communication with them to be able to create this, I guess, even playing platform so everybody knows what are the census blocks that are eligible. And again, we looked at the FCC data and we corroborated it with the speed tests that are existing. So yes, for those parishes that have elected a partner or have indicated, certain partners, we will be reaching out. And for those who are interested in getting in touch with us to even begin conversations in the partnership, my contact information is available on our website at planacadiana.org. And we're open to entertaining whatever conversations need to happen with whatever local providers and or providers that are interested in becoming part of this gumbo initiative, as well as developing partnerships with the parishes and or school systems. So yes, we have those mapping products available. Just get in touch with our office, and then we'll help guide you all in the right direction.
And I will say, we do want strong partnerships with our parish leadership. So that is also a key contact to make. If you want to be working in the different parishes, reach out to the parish president, let them know it. They are all working on, strategies, and so we want to feed that together. Yes, Keith?
I just want to point out, speaking from the main parish standpoint, if you look at what the title was today, it's fiber to the home. So our goal is fiber to the home. So,
Right.
If not what you're looking at.
Right.
We're not looking to partner with. We're looking
Right.
for fiber to the home. I know it might not be what's in the rules or whatever the government's saying you want, but
Right.
our goal is fiber to the home.
Correct. And we know at the end of the day, we might not cover Acadiana 100% fiber to the home. It might be 90 or 95%. There may have to be other stopgap solutions, but those solutions we'll have to find another answer for, because this initiative really is to get future-proof technology, so we're not back here in 5 years having these same conversations trying to find new money to do the same thing. We want to do this one time, and we want to check that box and say, done, they've got fiber, we can move on to their next issue. That's really our objective. So thank you, Keith.
And that's also prioritized in the parish ARPA funds that they have received. In the direct assistance, there are certain speed levels that are prioritized for the ARPA allocation. So just consider that if you plan on partnering with the parish, there may be certain speeds that need to be met.
One last question. Sustainability. What happens after 5 years?
That's okay.
So sustainability in terms of the infrastructure that's deployed? Right, and so for Gumbo in particular, the ISPs are the applicants. And so it's incumbent upon the ISPs to understand their obviously your business model, where you want to scale. Can you sustain that? Because it's going to be your infrastructure at the end of the day. You are going to own, operate, and maintain. And so when you're making your commitment to the Gumbo funds, you need to understand what capacity do you have to be able to scale up. Because at the end of 5 years, it's yours.
I'm going to also, I just want to add something real quick.
After 5 years, they can go up as high as they want. The cost of the monthly service.
So what? Right. So one of the things, I guess we don't have control over, but that we want to see. So this is kind of one-time funding, right? And there are a lot of, you don't necessarily want to take government money and keep funding, but what we want to see is healthy competition. Right. I'm going to tell you that. So where we can plant those seeds, we think natural market drivers are the best things that could have checks and balances in here. In Lafayette, we have probably more providers than anybody else, and there are the market drives the prices, and so And I think we have better service as well, amongst many providers, not just our municipal provider. But because I think that municipal provider is there, it drives the market to a more fair playing field.
The other thing to consider is,
Yeah.
if you're putting up either anything in kind or a right-of-way, you can ask for something in return. And part of that may be building into your agreement price controls. And that's what I would suggest doing. If you're going to put some money up through your ARPA funds or local dollars or donating right-of-way or access, make it contingent upon a certain level of service and a certain price point.
As of now, how many parishes
Who's talking?
do you see will meet the requirements of November, December in our region?
The question was, how many parishes can reasonably meet the expectations of Gumbo?
I think in terms of applicants, I'll tell you where we think based on level of engagement. How about that? Because we won't know until December 31st of this year. In terms of the parishes that are most engaged, and that's in terms of just conversations we're having, et cetera, and really local leadership, obviously Acadiana as a region is active, right? Senla, so Grant, Rapides, LaSalle, they're pretty active. Concordia, Catahoula, East Carroll, Tangipahoa, probably East Feliciana, DeSoto, Sabine.
So is that parish engagement or provider engagement? Because these applications are provider.
I know, but I'm saying those are parishes that are actively working with providers to identify and look at positioning themselves to Gumbo.
So in our region, how many parishes do you think meet the requirements of our region?
I mean, that's, I don't know. I mean, if I look at your NTIA application, I mean, how many parishes does that cover?
It didn't cover any one in particular, but it touched 3.
Huh? Oh, okay, all right, got it, sorry. So I would imagine, I wouldn't be surprised if 5, 6, 7 parishes in this region apply.
Yeah.
I mean, I think look at where all the RDOF folks are and where they're invested. If I'm in your shoes and I'm getting RDOF companies investing in our parish, I would talk to them and say, hey, we really need this. Are you interested in applying for Gumbo? I would look at the current incumbents, ask them, and then push them and say, hey, we need broadband. What can we do to work together?
Are you aware of any, I guess, parishes where the providers just don't seem interested in upgrading? They simply just feel, someone mentioned it earlier, I'm sorry to wait until the end, but I think it's important.
So,
Because I wanted to hear what the other areas, the other people are talking about.
no provider has come to us and said, we are not interested in a parish. And I think they're being careful with that. They're being very careful. No parish, so different parishes are at different levels of engagement. So on Wednesday, we're actually having a meeting, a webinar with 14 or 15 parishes that have their digital navigator because they're trying to share best practices and they want to start sharing, information.
So Beneath, I will say his parish has probably had 15, 20, 25, 30 meetings with providers. I would put him in a highly engaged category.
So I would push them, in addition to the folks that have RDOF money in your parish, to say, look, what do we need to do between now and November 1st when the application period opens and then December 31st when it closes to apply? And if none of those guys want to apply, I would reach out to other companies to say, come and apply. I mean, you're basically courting investors. It's just like any parish courting investors. Now's the process.
Okay, one more question, then we wrap.
Rusty Wilson, Conterra Networks, and that's kind of what I was going to get at. We're a middle mile provider, and we provide services to a lot of the rural school districts and things. So we've got assets in the ground. You mentioned ALA, ALA, uranium, things like that people really don't know exist. So we develop partnerships like with Chris and them to do the last mile. What's the best way to find out, I guess, a local last mile provider, or how could they hook up with us as a potential partner? Do y'all have anything like that on the website? Like listing assets of different private providers?
We do not.
Okay.
We do not. I mean, I think that's something we're organically having the providers come together to identify and partner with each other, right? On both middle mile and last mile connectivity. Again, the focus is last mile connectivity. That's also a rationale why we decided not to have state procurement involved, right? So we are wanting the locals to make the decision to identify the companies that they want to partner with and endorse, for Gumbo, should they go down that path. So.
Okay, so we're going to wrap. That was the one question. I want to thank everybody. Really, this conversation is going to continue. This is not the end of it by any means. And stay engaged, and thank you again very much for being here. Appreciate it.